Welcome to The Critique, where today we are looking at a submitted investigative piece arguing that a major domestic news network received and acted upon a highly classified leak regarding the precise timing of a military strike on Iran, exploring the national security dangers and the alleged selective enforcement by investigative authority.
Right, and it has an incredibly strong, urgent premise. And I really love the compelling use of public polling data to underscore the stakes. But I think our focus today needs to be on tightening the logical causality and refining the structural focus to make the argument truly unassailable.
Strengthening the core accusation requires preemptively disarming alternative explanations for the rival network's early morning broadcasting readiness.
Yeah, exactly. Because right now, the source material draws this very direct line between, the presence of specific anchors at the studio early on a Saturday and the receipt of an operational leak.
Which, looks highly suspicious on its face.
Oh, completely. You have an anchor sitting in the makeup chair at Navy Lawn at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. The military correspondent is mobilized and the broadcast goes live literally 30 seconds before the official sirens start blaring.
30 seconds.
Right, it's wild. But the weakness here is that the material currently lacks a robust dismantling of alternative scenarios. It relies heavily on rhetorical disbelief, like the author keeps asking, how could they possibly know, rather than actually closing the logical loop.
Yeah, it briefly mentions that the rival editor offered a shifting narrative, claiming they were just reacting to earlier public reports of an imminent strike.
Right, the Friday night rumors.
Exact. But it dismisses this without thoroughly deconstructing why that defense falls flat. It's sort of like accusing a meteorologist of stealing a confidential weather report just because they brought an umbrella to work, without first proving they couldn't have simply looked outside at the dark cloud.
That is a perfect analogy. If I'm reading this as a skeptic or, playing defense for that network, I would argue exactly what their editor argued. I'd say, hey, we're a major news organization. We heard the Friday night rumors, so we staffed up just in case.
So the suggestion here is to fortify the investigative logic by explicitly testing and debunking that general readiness counter-argument before cementing the final conclusion.
Yes, the writer needs to move beyond just pointing at the outcome and expecting the reader to assume foul play. A concrete example of how to fix this would be to dedicate a full, substantial paragraph to analyzing standard newsroom operating procedures during regional high-alert periods.
So breaking down the actual physical logistics of a flagship live broadcast.
Exactly. Because getting an anchor to the studio isn't just someone rolling out of bed and flipping on a webcam.
Right.
Live television production requires a highly specific and flexible chain of commands. You have to boot up the control room. You need satellite links, bring in prompter operators, run the talent through hair and makeup.
Coordinate the lighting, the audio.
Yes, all of it. So if the writer takes the time to break down that mechanical timeline, showing procedurally that it takes, say, precisely 3 hours to mobilize this specific crew on a Saturday morning, the math of the general readiness defense totally crumbles.
Wait, let me push back on that for a sec. Couldn't the network just argue they kept a skeleton crew overnight because of those Friday rumors?
They could try, but general readiness does not produce hyper-specific timing. If they were truly just riding the wave of Friday night speculation, why wasn't that specific anchor in the chair at 3 a.m.? Why not 5 a.m.?
Ah, I see.
Right? By comparing the exact timeline of their broadcast going live 30 seconds before the sirens against a timeline of general open-source speculation, you show why assembling that specific team at that specific hour is impossible without direct knowledge of the H-hour.
So you systematically dismantle the shifting defense by making it a mathematical impossibility.
Exactly. Once you tear down the possibility that they just guessed the timing, you leave the reader with no escape hatch. The only remaining logical conclusion is the one the writer is arguing, which is that an operational leak occurred.
Maintaining a strict narrative perimeter around the leak investigation is essential to prevent the primary thesis from being diluted by secondary geopolitical commentary.
This is such a critical pivot because building seamlessly from the need for a tighter logical core, a strong argument also requires a tightly controlled narrative environment. And this leads us directly into the pacing of the included interviews.
Yeah, specifically the extensive inclusion of the minister's interview.
Right. Now, the minister's personal anecdote about keeping the operation a secret for 3 days is highly relevant. It's incredible material.
It really is.
She notes her own 15-year-old daughter was stranded abroad because the minister refused to act on the highly classified information she held.
It's a massive personal sacrifice. But the weakness here is what happens next. Following that anecdote, she launches into this incredibly lengthy commentary on broad geopolitical strategies.
Yeah, she goes into blocking Iran's nuclear potential, targeting ballistic missiles, hoping for an Iranian regime change.
It's a lot.
It is way too much. It severely disrupts the pacing. These segments pull the reader out of what should be a tense, minute-by-minute investigative thriller and suddenly drops them into a general policy briefing.
It totally dilutes the impact of the primary investigation. The cognitive load just shifts completely.
Exactly. The reader's brain is suddenly forced to stop tracking the timeline of the news broadcast leak and start mapping out Middle Eastern ground offensives.
But playing devil's advocate again, I can hear the writer arguing that detailing these massive military movements makes the media leak seem even more dangerous. Like, look at the stakes. Why cut context that proves the severity of the situation? I totally get that instinct, but it misunderstands how human intention works in persuasive writing. The severity of the leak is already established by the fact that it involves a military strike on a foreign nation. Adding granular details about Lebanon doesn't heighten the stakes of the media leak. It just introduces an entirely separate topic.
So the suggestion is to streamline the narrative by compartmentalizing or heavily trimming the broader geopolitical talking points.
Yes, ensuring every single retained quote directly serves the central thesis of the intelligence breach.
So for a concrete example, we definitely retain the minister's powerful contrast about her daughter.
Absolutely keep that. Use this personal sacrifice as a direct narrative foil to the alleged recklessness of the media leak. The minister held the secret, and her family suffered a massive inconvenience for the security of the state. Meanwhile, the network got the secret and immediately rushed to the makeup chair to secure television ratings.
That juxtaposition is devastatingly.
It really is, because it compares two human reactions to the exact same piece of highly classified information.
And as for the specific actions on the broader stuff, we just strip it out?
Aggressively remove the sections detailing the 4,000-kilometer missile threat to Europe and the coordination with the U.S. administration regarding energy infrastructure.
What if the author really loves those points?
If they want to keep them, pitch them as an entirely separate piece focused on regional military strategy. Keeping this current document laser-focused on the media and the leak ensures the reader never loses the thread. Any deviation into long-term nuclear strategy breaks that carefully constructed tension.
Elevating the rhetorical tone from overt partisan grievance to a universal, objective security standard will significantly expand the material's persuasive reach and credibility.
This links the structural focus we just talked about directly to the overall tone, because just as the content needs to be streamlined to keep the reader engaged, the language itself must be calibrated to persuade the widest possible audience.
Not just those who already agree with the author.
Exactly. And the weakness here is that the text frequently utilizes loaded political phrasing and selective ideological framing.
Yeah, phrases comparing this event to those who don't help Kaplan, which references a specific ideological protest movement, or explicitly calling the justice system politicized and accusing it of covering up in broad daylight.
Right, and the constructive question we have to raise about audience alignment is there a risk that focusing so heavily on specific political grievances might alienate a reader who would otherwise agree with the security concerns?
I mean, it makes the piece read like an ideological hit piece rather than a rigorous, undeniable journalistic expose.
Exactly. The underlying argument that different leaks are treated with unequal severity by law enforcement is totally valid for an investigative piece. But utilizing this hyper-partisan language undermines it.
But hold on. If the writer strips away all the anger, don't they risk sanitizing the truth? The audience reading this is likely already outraged by the double standard, right? Doesn't a sterile, objective tone strip away the passion that drives the narrative?
It's actually the exact opposite. When you use partisan markers like Kaplan or explicitly tell the reader there is a politicized cover-up, you immediately trigger the reader's defensive bias.
Right, the walls go up.
Exactly. Their amygdala fires. They experience cognitive dissonance and stop processing your facts entirely. They just categorize the piece as partisan noise and tune it out. By telling the reader exactly how to feel, the author inadvertently gives half the audience an excuse to dismiss the very real, very dangerous facts of the leak by simply attacking the writer's political bias.
So the suggestion is to shift the tonal framing to focus strictly on the universal dangers of operational leaks and the objective disparity in law enforcement.
Yes. Allow the data and the facts to organically guide the reader to the intended conclusion without explicitly telling them how to feel. Show, don't tell.
So a concrete action here when discussing the differing treatment of various leaks, remove the emotionally charged editorializing.
Right. Instead, present a stark, side-by-side timeline, formatted objectively, almost like a legal dossier.
Like Investigation A, the bill document was opened within X days and resulted in Y arrests. Investigation B, the pager operation leak to Bergman, and Investigation C, the strike timeline leak, have seen no arrests after Z days.
Exactly that format. It forces the reader's brain to do the math. By putting the data side by side, the disparity becomes an undeniable objective reality rather than a subjective political opinion.
You don't need to call the authorities corrupt. The reader looks at the timeline, recognizes the glaring inconsistency, and just arrives at the conclusion of a cover-up on their own.
And when a reader arrives at a conclusion independently, they hold on to it much more fiercely than if they were simply spoon-fed the author's outrage.
This tonal shift also completely changes how we should use the polling data in the material, right?
Oh, absolutely. The author has this incredible data showing 62% of the public views the enforcement as unequal. Right now, it's buried under the partisan language.
So let the polling data carry the weight of the outrage.
Yes. By neutrally stating that 62% of the public views the enforcement as unequal, the author validates the grievance through empirical data rather than partisan labels. It makes the critique of the investigative authorities much harder for detractors to dismiss.
It corners them using their own objective reality. A spokesperson can easily issue a statement rejecting partisan smears, but they can't argue with the statistical reality of public perception and a mathematical timeline of arrest.
Exactly. It broadens the coalition of outrage. Top-tier investigative journalism transcends partisan lines through the sheer crushing weight of its objective evidence.
Well said. Let's quickly summarize the three main takeaways for the writer. First, rigorously close the logical loopholes regarding the rival network's readiness. Break down those procedural timelines to systematically dismantle the coincidence defense.
Second, trim the geopolitical policy tangents to maintain a breathless investigative pace. Keep the personal stakes like the minister's daughter, but lose the broader military strategies.
And third, adopt a more objective, data-driven tone to maximize credibility and impact. Use those timelines and polling data to show the disparity, rather than just telling the reader to be angry.
I really think implementing these structural and tonal shifts will elevate this piece tremendously. It is such vital subject matter, and it deserves a framing that makes it absolutely undeniable.
Absolutely. We warmly invite the listener to implement these shifts and submit the revised material back to the critique for another look. Constructing an unassailable argument is tough work, but it's incredibly rewarding. Thanks for joining us.